Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Hamilton. I had the privilege of being one of the 2018 Now and There Accelerator artists. My project, the Founders Project, was a multimedia installation that reimagined Boston Public School high school students as the legendary founders of West and West Central African ethnic groups ancestral to the African diaspora. I am thrilled to introduce critical race and mural historian and acting president of MassArt, Dr. Kimberly Pinder. Dr. Pinder's talk is Histories Through Practice and Participation, What Can Public Art Do? This will be followed by a Q&A moderated by Sabrina Dorsonville, who is an artist as well as Director of Civic Design, the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. Public art disrupts the idea that art is a luxury for the wealthy. At its most radical manifestations, public art affords us the ability to reclaim and take ownership over the spaces in which we live. When done right, public art can express the history, ethics, desires, and pride of a community, allowing artists to share ideas that transcend time and space. At its best, public art reframes the creative process as an act of love between the artists and the communities they create their work.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm really just thrilled to be able to be here for you for about an hour, and that I was asked to present at this really amazing day for you all, and this opportunity for all of you. I mean, I've worked with mural artists for many, many years now, being a mural historian. And one of the things that, and also training them. So I think that, again, having this as a resource is absolutely phenomenal. And that's why I jumped at the opportunity to be a part of it. So I'm just going to be presenting a little bit today, some of the history that I'm sure many of you know about murals. I'm a mural historian. I have been teaching a class, I guess now since the mid-90s, called, the history of mural making, from cave paintings to graffiti. And I have incorporated in that class, every single time that I've taught it, an actual mural making project in which I partner wherever I am. Whatever city I'm in, I partner with a mural painter, and we work with students to actually create a mural somewhere in the city. And during that process, as you can imagine, a large part of the class is actually dedicated to teaching students how to do everything from the budget to the proposal to actually being able to present and work with their site and the people in the community that they will be addressing in their public art piece. And that has always been just an incredibly rewarding experience for them and for me. And there are many of these students who have gone on to become very competent and engaged community artists from leaving my course. So that's something that is why I was so excited to be a part of this, these 2 days. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and I hope this works, and show you a few slides and discuss a lot of what, for instance, was put into the chat when I was asked to write recently a piece on how can art history be decolonized. And I wholeheartedly felt that community art practice is at the core of any hope that art history has for decolonization. And I'll say a little bit more about that now that I'm going to share my screen, and I hope this works. I don't see where it says share my screen. Okay. Okay. Share this and okay. Is it working? Yes, it is. You can see the presentation, or are you just seeing me? Can anyone
Yes,
say yes?
we can.
Okay. All right. It's a little disorienting, you know, those of you who've done this, because you kind of see your screen, but you're not totally sure because you're also seeing yourself. So in preparing for this, I actually went through a number of PowerPoints that I have, and I ended up reworking one that I had done for our first year orientation for our students at Mass Art last year. And I was really excited to introduce them to public art and how it's so important to look around you. If you're not a public artist, have no plans to be one, at least you should be engaged in noticing and appreciating the public art that's in your city. And I pride myself on always moving somewhere that has a very robust public art program. So that's what this is starting with. Can we talk? What does public art have to say? And that's where we can get into, you know, the basic histories of mural art from, of course, Diego Rivera and the amazing set of murals in the mural movement that he was a part of in the 20s and 30s in Mexico, that of course was asserting an indigenous identity and was very much propaganda for the movement against the colonizing forces there in Mexico. And this is just one of the most phenomenal pieces in the National Palace in Mexico City that has these wonderful layers of action from, you know, showing conflicts and the fight for freedom to actually at the very top showing all of the current leaders at that time. And again, I think that I'm speaking to some very educated people here in this workshop because you know your history. That's what I love the most about public artists, is that they are always looking to the past to garner lessons and tips so they can also be very influential public artists. So I'm just running through this in terms of course, the relationship of what public art can say and how it is speaking to a public that often is disenfranchised, one that is not allowed to be in a museum or has no interest in going. And that is one of the wonderful empowerments of public art, is that it is on the street and it is there accessible to everyone. And that's also what I also like to tell my students is the important responsibility of a public artist, is that you are putting your art out there for people to see without wanting to see it possibly, or knowing they're going to see it or choosing to see it. And here, of course, is just a couple of examples from the important Chicano mural movement from the 1970s. And then we zoom back in time to the Sistine Chapel and how it still is such an incredibly influential work of art that someone like Diego Rivera, for instance, was heavily influenced by. And I always have to show the Lascaux Caves because this is another important fixture in the history of public art and mural art, because it shows from the very beginning that these works on architecture were about communicating to people, communicating to a group that understood and looked to these grand images for guidance. And one of my favorite things in these, of course, are the handprints that you find all over. And that, to me, encapsulates how much they are relating to the people who are looking at it. Again, this connection that public art has with its viewer, that's like no other. These are some of my favorite, more decorative works of art. That is a tradition that goes back for many decades in South Africa. And this is a female-oriented tradition, mainly because it's decorating the home. And these are also show the wonderful connection among the arts. So again, when I do a whole lecture on this in my class, I often show the ceramics and the textiles that echo and have a dialogue with each other in terms of the colors and, of course, the patterns that all have meanings to the individual makers in these homes. And I liked how, again, zooming, still staying with South Africa, a whole different type of public art project from the domestically oriented one done by the owners of the homes, to this amazing project that really started to launch the graffiti artist JR's career when he expanded the type of work that he was doing to encompass ornamenting entire buildings and neighborhoods, and doing so by injecting and making sure to make prominent the people who lived in those areas. So these beautiful portraits, photo portraits that he made, he then blew up into these wraps that he put on trains and the roofs of the homes where these people lived. So again, constant connection with the community. And this is, again, I have so much more to learn about murals in Boston, but I did just want to throw in some that you all are familiar with. And again, this was something that I created for our students at Mass Art, so they would know to look for these all over the city. And this one is just down the street from Mass Art at the Northeastern campus, and has a very large mural program there. And of course, one of my first real connections moving to Boston with mural activity was being invited to this fantastic opening for, or unveiling of, this gorgeous piece right after I had started at Mass Art. So this will always have a place in my heart for sure, by Pro Black. And a lot of my work actually has been centered on the mural movements in Chicago. And I hope you can read this amazing text by Bill Walker, who was one of the founding members of the Chicago Public Art Group, which started off as the Chicago Mural Group. And in the 60s, one of the first mural groups to be formed. And he later became pretty much an icon for the Chicano mural movement, the Black mural movement across the country. But what he says here relates very much to my thoughts on why I think that public art and mural making is a way to save art history. And I just wanted to read a little bit more from the text that was mentioned in the chat. And this is based on questions that I think it was about 30 of us, 30 art historians across the world were asked, how can art history be decolonized? And my response to this particular question was, as a critical race and mural historian, I see the increase of public initiatives and organizations around the world as a barometer for art history and its future. Public art making, its collaborative process, curation, and interpretation are steadily dominating the field as an incredibly present and fertile art historical methodology that presents histories through practice and participation from the artists and their audiences in endless ways. And then I went on, like, another question. Again, we're all asked the same question, a set of questions. Another one was, where should decolonization in relation to art history happen? What strategies might be different what strategies might different spaces for decolonization demand? And this is where, again, I felt the public space is so important. And my response was, what happens when scholars include responses from viewers other than themselves in their work? What if their work is largely facilitating instead of didactic? Those art historians who embrace the fragility of their own authority will lead the way in decolonizing art history. And I have more things that I said there, but I think those of you who are participating in public art, that is what you do, right? That's what I meant by methodology, that you are gathering information, responding to it, aware of your audience constantly. And that is what I feel is so important to what public artists can contribute to art history, visual culture, critique, all of these things, because it is at the core of what community artists do. So I'll move along. I don't want to take up too much time so we can have Q&A. But Bill Walker was one of the 9 artists who was part of that big collaboration of the Wall of Respect in Chicago in 1967 that many feel kicked off a large national mural movement. And you can see and it was repainted multiple times. This is the the second version of it. You can see the eclectic styles and the mixes because there were so many people painting. I want to show this wonderful video. I hope this works. And this was a video that was sent to me, someone had found on a very odd blues website. So I hope you can hear I didn't think about audio, but we'll see what happens. And this, I think, encapsulates what the Wall of Respect meant physically as a site in Chicago in 1967.
Should have heard me begging. Ooh, don't murder me. You should have heard me that moment. Saying, ooh, don't murder me. And I better get to wonder what the world do you want with me. the blues. What you want with me? You got me every morning blue. Why don't you let me be?
So that amazing, really old music video. What I love about it is that you really get a sense of where the Wall of Respect was, because as an art historian, I just showed tons of slides that give you very little sense of scale or location. And as you all know, location is key to public art. So I try to find such context was really a revelation for me, and I try to show it as much as I can. So this piece was done across the street from the Wall of Respect a couple of years later. And one of the things that I wanted to point out here is, well, there are a couple of things. As you can see, Bill Walker wanted the mural itself to become a site of art making. And he set up those easels, he donated the paper, and started that actually while the wall was being painted, because he really wanted the community not only to take ownership of the wall, but also to encourage them to do art making as part of the project. And what's amazing about Bill Walker is that the engagement that most of you also experience in being in a public site making art, the engagement with the community was one of the most important things to him. And when he died, they actually found tons of cassette tapes where he would record his interactions with people while he was on the street making his work. And they're phenomenal, because it was everything from, oh, you're going to go to that protest at 7 o'clock tonight in Daley Plaza, to this is how I mix my paints. So he was all about the process of engaging with the community as the core mission of him being on a street corner, publicly painting and making his art. The other thing I want to point out here is, if you might have noticed one of those close-ups during the video showed a part of this wall. And clearly you can see that they're actual pieces of newspapers and magazine pages that are wheat pasted up onto the wall itself. This was something that I found to be fascinating, and I decided to pursue it as one part of my research on Bill Walker. And I've given a few presentations and written on this. It was something that really showed how important it was for murals to be contemporary and to be speaking at the very moment that the community sees it to what they were concerned with. And I try to tell my students, especially it's hard now, and maybe this is part of the Q&A about the preservationist culture that we have for public art right now. He was not so interested in that. He was interested in the contemporaneity, is that the right word? Contemporaneity of a mural, that it was always on point, speaking to its community on whatever is happening to them at that moment. And that every mural needs to change and be open to change. And one way that he would do that was to put actual pieces of newspaper, articles, magazines onto the mural itself. This is, as you can see, a gigantic multi-story mural that he did in the I think it was finished by 72. And it lasted, I believe, over a decade. Over 2 decades actually in Chicago. And here is a detail. Okay, so what I'm showing you, if you look in the lower left-hand corner where you see that Schlitz sign for beer hanging out there. So that corner there is what I'm showing you as a detail. And here is where he would, if he didn't have actual pieces of newspaper and magazines, he would paint headlines from newspapers and magazines. And when this was done, I believe in 72, he actually copied some of the photographs surrounding the student protests. The most famous one, you can see they're referenced in Kent State. And the other thing I wanted, oops, I think I didn't pull out the right thing. Okay, so he also had a detail in there that I didn't put in here of Bobby Seale at his trial when he was bound and gagged. That was also one of the details on this wall. Hard to see, but it was like kind of right next to the detail that I had there. And ironically, or maybe related, I actually watched Chicago 7 last night, so I recommend go watch it. And when you see that scene where Bobby Seale gets chained and bound and gagged, that was something that was being directly reacted to in real time, essentially, by Bill Walker in his mural. All right. So I want to wrap up with, again, moving around Massachusetts a little bit. There are so many mural initiatives throughout the state, from Lawrence to Lynn. And that was, again, a real treat for me. Within a couple of weeks of being in Boston, I was taken on a wonderful ride to Lynn to see some of the amazing work that's being done through that program. I'll just show you a few of these. As well as here in Boston. I often like to throw this slide in here because public art can take on so many different forms, and it can be embraced, it can embrace its ephemerality, which again relates a little bit to what I was saying about Bill Walker, how he felt that murals needed to change. They needed to respond to their environment as quickly and as often as possible. So these, I'm sure many of you know, Knitfeedy, knitting as a public art form, and this type of amazing natural plant graffiti that you can see on the left. And then I'm always taking pictures of it, no matter where I am. And this was a bunch of stencils that I saw in Los Angeles many years ago that, again, were just these wonderful, surprising pieces of art that was in a gas station on the ground. And of course, the ghost bikes, which, what are they saying to us? They are responding as memorials for, unfortunately, people who have died while riding their bikes. So there's just such an array of public art that, again, is speaking to so many different audiences and about different topics. So this, again, was what I told the students: keep listening, because public art is always speaking to you. You just have to make sure you notice it. And I'll end right now with a little bit about graffiti, because I think that it is very relevant. And I was had the great opportunity for a couple of the Guerrilla Girls from the 1980s movement, feminist movement, to ask me to write about race in their work for an exhibition. And I decided, since I have such an interest in graffiti, to actually write about their relationship to graffiti with these site photographs. And this is, again, it's a much longer article, but I just wanted to remind us about what I was trying to show in this talk, and that all of you are aware of, that when you pick a site, there are so many layers to it. And I was fascinated with these artists sending me these site photographs, because so much of the history of the Guerrilla Girls is usually like a close-up of these posters. And I was really interested in these larger images that showed their relationship, somewhat contentious, with graffiti in the Lower East Side, where they were doing this in the mid 80s. And so I'm just, again, going over this quickly, but I was very interested in interpreting and zooming to see how the graffiti artists were responding to these artists who were using this type of guerrilla public art intervention on top of existing public art interventions of graffiti. And this one in particular, I was interested in because if you notice, the graffiti artist underneath has pulled away some of the Guerrilla Girls poster to reclaim their space where their graffiti was. While on the other side, you'll see that the red graffiti, the graph, has taken great pains only to go over the edge of it. And I think I have a way of showing this here. Here's that detail where they kind of redid a space of their graffiti and actually also went over some of the Guerrilla Girl poster. So those are the kind of details that I went and did even delved into what this meant about public space and how these two sets of artists were vying for that space and what that meant. And then I was really fortunate to be able to interview the graffiti artist Pink, because she worked with the Guerrilla Girls and they had no idea she was a graffiti artist. So it was interesting to talk to her about being in such an, also struggling in a very male dominated field of graffiti at that time and making her own mark as a female graffiti artist while on the down low also working with some of the Guerrilla Girls, and how, again, those layers of anonymity and kind of hidden behavior in the middle of the night. They were really interested in working with her because she knew how to wheat paste, and she also knew the places to do them. So again, using her skills coming out of the graffiti culture, she had a lot to say about that, and it was really an interesting rabbit hole that I went down there with a different type of public art and how it interacted with the art world at that time. So I think that's enough from me for today. But I really look forward to the Q&A session. Thank you so much.
We're going to take a moment and let the interpreters switch. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pinder, for your talk right now. So my name is Sabrina Dorsonville, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm so grateful to be joining you all from the traditional land of the Massachusetts people. Also super excited to be joining this conversation as Stephen mentioned, as the Director of Civic Design, City of Boston, but also as an artist and a Mass Art alum. And so there's a lot wrapped up in this moment that, we will not have enough time to really go deeper, but I see this as the first conversation of many. And yeah, I had a series of questions that I was ready to ask, and a lot of that shifted a bit just after hearing what you've said. So I'll ask 2 or 3 questions, and I think we'll open it up to folks who have joined us. And so grateful about how many folks are here with us today. But you spoke to the way in which public art acts as this reflection of our current state. And we obviously know, especially in the context of art history, and art history being a way of sort of chronicling our culture, that current state holds the past. But can you speak to how public art really points toward the future, and how participatory public art projects can really become these sort of vehicles to that imagining of what could be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what's really exciting, that about public art. I guess all art is speaking to time periods, right? Present, rehashing the past, looking towards the future. But with public art, you are engaging with so many different audiences, known and unknown, uh, found and planned audiences. So the responsibility of the artist then is what is this grand vision that's going to have so much exposure that you're going to present? And what I mean by that is, so many artists obviously do art for themselves, and when they think of their audiences, especially if it's a traditional audience of being in a museum or a gallery, they have some idea of a very narrow set of people, wherever it is, whether it's in a gallery that caters only to women, let's say, or if it's a gallery that caters to a rural audience, they still have a sense of that narrow scope. But with public art, it's a free-for-all in many ways, depending on who's driving by, depending on where the building is. And I think that being able to embrace a vision of the future, and like someone with Bill Walker was very much about the future, but for him, and there's great quotations by him where he says, you must know your past, right? So he was always trying to create that dialogue between the past and the present. Remember the 60s and 70s, where so much was happening as we are now entering right now with protests. And understanding that those two things were the step towards the future. So, if we had time to just go into in depth in one of his murals, there is the future in there. So that last one I showed, it was called Peace and Salvation, because the middle of it, even though he had all those things referencing contemporary events, the middle was this explosion, this opening that looked like the whole wall had been blown open. And there in the middle is harmony. There are people of multiple races holding hands and being together. And so all of the other stuff was about, we have to get through this to get to the main future goal.
That's super. I mean, it's what's I'm feeling like grounded in, and especially as, again, someone who is in the last year tried to exercise that muscle of what does public art look like in my practice. Something that I've wrestled with is really trying to ground myself in context. And so I would love for you to just continue to expand on like why context matters, like why does it actually mean something? And I think the Guerrilla Girls example that you gave is a good example of, there's a story being told, there's multiple stories being told there. And so when you are about to act, right, as an artist, why is it so important to really consider context and be thoughtful in approaching those tensions and that context?
Yeah, and I that's again when I'm talking about methodologies, how community art practice can be seen as a methodology that I consider that informs me as an art historian, right? Because you have to be thoughtful, you have to understand that you're putting something out there that people will not be choosing to look at, and that you have to acknowledge what is going to happen to my piece and how is it going to speak to so many different people. And that is, again, I can't emphasize enough how I explain to my students a great and wonderful responsibility of being a community artist and a public artist, is that you are saying something and it's not just to you or 3 people that you can sit down and explain in depth or hand out a piece of paper or report, that you are putting something out there and it's out there and that's it. And you're not going to be there. And that's why context is so important. Either you create, for you to create a context for what you're trying to say, so that whoever comes up to it can get something out of it. And maybe, as you said, multiple stories, because there'll be multiple audiences. but just knowing that that is your responsibility, I think, is one of the most important things to being a public artist.
Yeah, and I'm watching for the chat, but while I wait for folks to drop in questions, I have more that I am happy to send your way. And I think the obligation piece is like really interesting to me, and I don't know if this is the right framing for the question, but when we think about history, when we talk about the decolonizing history and things like that, this question of like, what is the truth? And we just said multiple stories, so there are likely so many sides to the current state that we are in right now. But do you feel like there's an obligation for artists to be truth tellers of some sort? And what does that maybe mean to you? How do you sort of interpret that notion?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that what's great about art making is that it is, it's always a given that it starts off as a safe space. And what I mean by that is that there can be something that is said in an article or a political speech or in an argument with a friend that already is setting up that this is contentious, this is political, this is a message, right? And I'm already have my guard up that I am about to have my values challenged. Art is so great at being able to draw you in, especially when it's beautifully made. It can draw you into those exact discussions, challenges, all of those things in a way that can catch people unawares, and I believe enables the message to get through a whole different venue in people's brains, and can allow a more open and productive way in which these same types of ideas and, as I keep saying, challenges to people's values that can happen. And that's what I think, again, what I'm always trying to push is this is the superpower of art, is that it can get people to think about things that a regular conversation could not happen, because they immediately are going to shut down on that.
I love that you.
Question.
No, it does, and I love that you use the word superpower, because again, my mind is racing, and I'm just like, this question of power, and it can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, right? And we know that power sometimes looks like oppression, right? Sometimes it looks like a lot of different things, depending on who we're talking about. But something that I've noticed in the last 5 years working in the context of city government, right? Also in re-engaging with the sort of mass art community, right? Trying to talk to artists and creatives and sort of sit in collaboration with our Office of Arts and Culture to say that we actually have a lot of power, right? We are telling these incredibly important stories, and we're not just telling stories, right? They're action oriented, and things are moving and changing by way of our making, and our process matters. And I'm curious how you envision or sort of continue to push beyond the course alone that you're teaching, but how do we continue to encourage not just young people, but artists in general to see that power that they have, to sort of step into it and acknowledge that it's not just a paint stroke on a wall, right? That you've created space for something, and that is power, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I, as we have everybody here, I'm just curious what sort of words of like encouragement or reminders or just sort of sitting with that, like this question of power, and how do we sort of step into it as creative folks while also being mindful and inclusive and thoughtful. Yeah, there's a lot there.
You actually reminded me that I didn't end with the slide I wanted to, and I'm going to share my screen for 1 second. When you're talking about power, and of course, the many public art manifestations of protest and memoriam and all of those things wrapped in together with images like this. One of the murals that was painted on the site of where George Floyd was murdered. And I like the context again. Obviously, I love trying to have murals in context where you have a protester right there and the flowers, everything that encapsulates this image of what the power of this mural is, and how it is putting in context a lot of things, our feelings, our constant assault by institutionalized racism, and also the protest and the response to it is all in this photo, which I love. So I'll stop sharing my screen, but I was supposed to have that in my presentation. So when you talk about power, I think that is something that any public artist needs to fully embrace. And from the pedagogical experience, every time I've taught that class, at the end, I ask the students, they are supposed to write a paper about how certain historical realities that they've been studying for someone like Michelangelo or Diego Rivera, how they had their own experiences that related to some of those. Like, so they read this whole thing, for instance, about Michelangelo and his letters about how his back hurt and all this stuff, like the actual physical toil that was taken on his body because of painting a ceiling for so many years. And then some students would say, when we were making our mural, I also, felt that was really hard, and they would say something like that. And the whole point of getting them to talk about themselves in a mural process was for them to also understand what they felt and how they feel they could move forward as a public artist. And inevitably, there would be a couple of students who would write, I will never, ever paint a mural. I will never, ever do a community art piece because, and then they would list, I don't like other people telling me what to do and how to change my art. I don't like responses from other people. I just want to make my art and not care about the community that it is going to be serving. Others feel that I hate collaboration with other artists. And I'm mentioning these because these are important things to know. And everyone here, if you are a public artist, you've made that decision that you do like that. Like, you can engage in that way, but not every artist can. And I think that's, again, working with such groups as the Chicago Public Art Group, where I would, bring classes there, and we would meet artists at murals, and they would tell amazing stories about the community interaction, about the ups and downs that they've had with everything from getting permits to just a really vocal person in that neighborhood that harassed them the whole time they were painting. And also learning that maybe you're a very quiet person, you don't want to interact with people while you're on the street corner, but that's really not an option. If that is something you want, then you need to not do public art, right? You need to just do work in your studio and then put it out there. And that's why I like to tell that story about Bill Walker, because he loved it. He loved that interaction. And that energized him and made him feel like that was why he was doing what he was doing. And I've even had instances where when we do these group public projects at the end of my class, I have asked certain people to identify your personality as someone who can be on the front line of the public engagement. And there have been some students that they don't even paint. They just are the spokespeople on the corner, protecting everyone up on the scaffold from being distracted or bothered by people asking them questions. So I think that, being okay with that and understanding all of these responsibilities is how you fully understand the power of what you're doing as a public artist.
I appreciate. I feel like you don't often get folks wrestling with the in the smaller details, right? The sort of interpersonal work that goes into figuring out how these things come to life and who's involved in making that happen. And it looks different between being a graffiti artist and a muralist and what the sort of ecosystem around those things. So I appreciate you, digging a little bit deeper. And we do have a question that I think is a bit connected to this, but on the other end, thinking about the sort of larger impact of this practice. And so the question is, what are your thoughts on public art and creative placemaking that can help fuel gentrification, displacement, and perhaps harm communities? And are there strategies to prevent this?
Yes, and that is another topic that I usually have a mural painter who comes to visit my class who is really good at answering that question because they've had like their own personal struggles with it. They've, like, for instance, turned down certain commissions because it just wasn't right. They just didn't want to sit right with that. And it is hard because, as we all know, artists are the foot soldiers of gentrification, always. And what happens when a community is really wanting to add beauty to their neighborhoods, and then it ends up adding so much beauty that it pushes out the original people in the neighborhood. Very difficult questions. And these are actually things that Bill Walker was very interested in. And so for him, he felt that being an activist in the community, on top of being an artist, and that's what, creating like the art center, essentially, the plein air art center that he created in front of the mural, talking to people. There's this whole thing about how he had a relationship with the Blackstone gang around that was around the Wall of Respect. You saw some of the graffiti related to them in that film. And they actually protected the mural, so those types of ways in which he was trying to be as engaged and part of the community, even though he didn't live in that actual neighborhood. He lived in another part of South Side. So I think those are questions that every public artist needs to wrestle with, and really do their research and do their soul searching about what commissions to take, what projects to take on, and also injecting that dialogue into the process. I think that's another thing. And again, that may mean that you don't get the commission, because you're putting out some hard things there that people don't want to face. But that's the choice, if you want to just make sure that dialogue happens and everyone is aware.
No, that's important. I mean, like, one of the questions that I was, really interested in asking you about was sort of what are the limitations of public art? And, we've, especially with that last question, sort of talking about the unintended consequences. And you said, artists are the foot soldiers of gentrification, while also like being the activists that are pushing up against that, right? And so it is this very interesting entanglement, and this question of responsibility is such a big one. And so I've appreciated the direction that our conversation has gone into talking about what is that like in like personal reflection you do, and like how that butts up against a lot of other things that are going to move around you. And so how conscious and how proactive and how thoughtful can you be? So I do want to pause and just see if there's any last questions from folks in the chat before we run out of time. But I do know one of the questions that has popped up is whether or not you have anywhere on social media or elsewhere that folks can see the images that you've shared in this presentation, and perhaps there's a way to share the presentation, but it looks like folks would love to be able to follow up on some of the pieces that you've shared.
Yeah, I can definitely send my presentation. I'm kind of an anti-social media person, so you can't find me.
No worry.
But I have no problem sharing my presentation. Again, it was just a hodgepodge of slides because, as you all know, public art is huge. And the mural movements that have continued to happen are amazing, and very prolific, especially in the last, I'd say, 25 years, when there's been so much public funding for public art, that has really caused a wonderful explosion of mural art around the world. So it's hard to keep on top of it. And I want to thank Napoleon for, adding his own personal experiences related to the images that I showed today. Thank you. Wait, there are a couple more.
Yeah, I want to echo that. Thank you. I know I've been trying to read it as we go, and I do appreciate that. This really does feel like the start of a conversation. And to your point, it's been really exciting just to see Boston, someone who was born here, to see Boston continue to change and embrace and grow, and the different ways in which public art is unfolding. Right, because not all of it is commissioned, right? Not all of it is just graffiti. And there's like you said, this explosion of a lot of things moving in order to continue to make our city not just more beautiful, but tell these stories publicly and engage publicly with art and this sort of level of thoughtfulness. So I would love to leave the last words to you with our last sort of 3 minutes. If there's anything else you'd like to share, or sort of parting words for folks as they continue the next day, and some change here with Now and There on the context of public art and art history and where we're headed.
Well, I actually, now Napoleon is mentioning Bobby Seale. Let me see if I can show that image that I was trying to show. I don't know. Now when I get out of this, I can't share my screen, so oh well. I don't think I can share my screen for some reason now. Oh well. But it's, yeah, I can't. I'm sorry. I have it in another slide presentation. Yes, there are several AfriCOBA artists. Yes, I gave a very abbreviated edition of this, and thank you, Napoleon. And there's quite a few books that have just come out on the Wall of Respect that are pretty fantastic, and I can actually send those along as well. One of them has some of the most amazing primary documents for the Wall of Respect, like their notes, from all the meetings of how they decided on who was going to be on the mural, and mapping out what figures are going to be where. So that's really great. Yes. So.
Yes, it looks like folks are going to be looking forward to all of those resources. So I think thank you for your abbreviated version, because of course, half hour is only so much. But it's been wonderful to chat with you, and look forward to.
Thank you for this opportunity. Mm-hmm.
So, thank you all.
We're gonna let the interpreters switch. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pinder and Sabrina, for that. That was wonderful. Are we all set? Great. Wow. I'm Leah Triplett Harrington. I use the pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm assistant curator of Now and There. I'm a little speechless. I don't know how to follow up that amazing conversation. So thank you again, Sabrina and Dr. Pinder, for being here with us and for sharing, and for Napoleon sharing your personal experiences with this. This is amazing. It's been a real privilege to be in conversation with you all today, and to be in our audience for this morning's panel as well. I hope, as you have, that you felt a sense of community throughout this first day of the Now and There Public Art Accelerator Forum. Thinking about so much of what Kimberly and Sabrina just were talking about, but also thinking about what Sam and Dawn Akwa's conversation, what they were discussing this morning about the different ways to engage and build community. Sam's comments about creating emotionally accessible works is really resonating with me in this moment where we're going through so much as a country and as a community. I'm also thinking of Stephen Hamilton's thoughts on public art as reframing the creative process as an act of love. I love that sentiment. And Dr. Pinder's reminder to us that public artists have a responsibility to their viewers, their communities, and that public art is a powerful way to connect with many different audiences and a way to embrace power and tell stories. Even though we aren't physically in the same room, I'm so grateful that we can hold this space together. Public art is not a solo endeavor, as I have learned many times over the course of my experience here at Now and There. Many, many people go into the making of public artwork as we talked about today. Trust and transparency are so important to this work, and I thank you for trusting us and being with us today. Tomorrow, I look forward to 2 more conversations centered on building trust and being transparent with communities that we work with. First, at 10:15 to 11:15, we'll have when and how engaging community in public art. After lunch, from 12:30 to 1:30, we'll have process and personality with your real questions on how to permit your projects. If you haven't registered for that session or sent us in your questions, I think we're going to drop some links in the chat for you to do that. And I encourage you to get those questions into us. Finally, artist Lauren Woods will be giving a case study on how process and personalities worked with her own project, a Dallas drinking fountain. So I look forward to being back here with you tomorrow. And just a few housekeeping items before then. We'll actually be starting at 10 a.m. with some coffee and chat with myself, Kate, and our Director of Operations, Victoria Hall, who you've seen on the chat today. Process and personality, as I mentioned, does require a separate registration. So please sign up for that if you haven't already. Please send me your permanent questions at info@nowandthere.org by 5 p.m. tonight. And finally, please remember to take breaks, stretch, and do whatever you need to do throughout these sessions. We are recording them, and they will be on our website later. We do have a guided conversation moderated by Keith Soul starting in about 30 minutes at 2:30 p.m. If you would like to join us, that also requires a separate registration, and I believe we're going to drop that into the chat. You can go there and join us for about an hour of conversation. And lastly, I want to say, I don't know if you can see it, but I am wearing a sweatshirt from Gabriel Sosa's amazing project that's up now in Dorchester, Roslindale, and Grove Hall. No es fácil, or it ain't easy. My sweatshirt says, it sucks, but we can tackle it, which I think is a good sentiment to leave the day with. If you want to buy one of these sweatshirts, all the funds are being donated to Mira, Sisters on Change, and Walk the Walk. And you can find him on Instagram. He's Gabriel Sosa on Instagram to do that. Thank you again. This has been so tremendous. Thank you to all of our speakers and moderators. Thank you to our VRM team. Thank you to everyone who's been here with us. And we'll see you back here tomorrow.
nothing in the world that I won't